structural issues. Now it's recording, now that so I'll move forward. So I was just saying that I welcome that we have innovations. I welcome that we have a place for exchanging these experiences, to exchange our views among the North and South. And for me, this is the only way to move forward, right? I understand innovations, they have a limit, and we are at this frontier, right? If we don't promote systemic changes in the future, innovations will not gain scale and will not, prevail. So for me, I would like to highlight two structural issues that we face in this planet and that we need to overcome in order to really make room for these innovations to flourish. One is the inequalities of income. We have to acknowledge and understand and work with the context that we have, especially in the global South, but also in the North, prevalent and crescent levels of poverty and informality. So we live in a very unequal world, and after COVID, informality and poverty, at least in the global South, is gaining, strength. And this is the reality. The second structural issue that I would like to call your attention to is land. It's crucial that we need to connect housing with urban planning and development. We are failing completely on this front, especially in the global South, completely. Housing is completely disconnected from urban planning and development, and land is at the core. I understand we need, as a community, we need to develop a vision and act with intention towards systemic changes. Understand better how can we expand, increase the sustainable supply of land without expanding our cities too much and overeating our rural and environmental surroundings, right? But maximizing what we already have, right? Increasing access to land and therefore to affordable housing, to be able from our end as urban people, housing people, to act upon these structural inequalities that we face. So I would just highlight three aspects of systemic changes, and then we start the panel. One is information and data. We need to understand more about land, where it's located, the informality aspect. We don't know how informality, we have no information about informality at all, accurate information. We need to improve that. Census data, informal ways of collecting data of informally occupied land, especially in the global South. Secondly, legal frameworks. Our laws are certainly not adjusted to promote and to increase the access to land to all and maximize the use of land. So we need to change the laws. We need to really be able to recognize the social function of the land and how land and cities can operate towards common good, towards a public good for the society, and less institutional arrangements and participatory governance. And with that, I stop my introduction, and we have short time for the panel. And so let's go in order, and I will just hand over to the speakers. We'll have 6, 7, 8 maximum minutes for each. So Dr. Wendy Cookier, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Strategy, founder of the Diversity Institute at Ryerson University. You are the first, and your bio and the bio of all panelists should be on the website. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I'm very honored to be here. I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. And in my country, Canada, most of us are settlers on Indigenous lands, and increasingly we are recognizing our history of genocide and attempting to address truth and reconciliation processes. And just so you know, my university was formerly named Ryerson. It is now named Toronto Metropolitan University, and that's a recognition of the fact that some people feel that the namesake of the institution was involved in the residential school process and the genocide of Indigenous peoples. And I raise that because one of the things that I wanted to build on, and I think Ana Claudia laid out some very important principles. My view is we have to bring a diversity and inclusion lens to this discussion because at least in my country, there are huge gaps between, for example, Indigenous peoples and others. We know that in Indigenous communities, there's a housing crisis. In highly industrialized, rich country, 30% of the communities do not have access to clean water. We know that Canada is a country of newcomers. In the city of Toronto, for example, half the population was born outside of the country. And yet, because of the systems that are currently in place to assess people's eligibility, whether it's for rental housing or to purchase housing, newcomers are discriminated against. We have lots of evidence. We just did a big study for the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board that shows that racialized people, particularly those who are Black, face multiple layers of discrimination in trying to access housing and also things like mortgages. And this research has been carried out very extensively in the United States, but Canada has similar problems, perhaps not on the same scale. And then, of course, we have issues about aging population, persons with disabilities, changes in demographics around multi-generational families, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have to bring those perspectives, I think, to the discussion of access to affordable housing. And in Canada, there's a very strong connection between socioeconomic status and privilege. So we know that people are racialized, people are Indigenous, people with disabilities and so on are more likely to be low income. And that has multiplier effects. They're more likely to be homeless, et cetera. The second thing that I wanted to say, which I think Ana Claudia pointed to, but perhaps didn't dig into, is the point about systemic change. And to drive systemic change, we need to understand the system. So we need to understand the layers that interact. In my country, for instance, financial institutions play an enormous role in access to housing on multiple levels. In my country, the regulatory frameworks have a big impact on the diffusion of innovations. And in this context, I wanted to say, not only do we need to bring a systems lens to this, we also need to always remember that innovation is about doing things differently. So the fact that we have new materials, we have new inventions that will allow us to create net zero homes and improve our use of resources, land, etc., means nothing if it isn't used, if those things are not employed, if those things are not applied, if we don't replicate and scale these solutions. And so it's very important to distinguish between what is possible and innovation, which is what is done, in my view, because a lot of times we focus energy on inventing new approaches and we don't pay sufficient attention to what the barriers are to driving implementation. That being said, I think in my country and around the world, there are some promising practices, and that, we can talk more about these, but I would include them in different clumps. So one has to do with, building and materials and approaches and technologies and how we move forward with net zero. Some of it has to do with building techniques. I'm very interested, for example, in models of modular homes and prefabricated homes and tiny homes and and other ways of thinking about how we create housing. So there's lots of work there. Changes to zoning, you know, in the city of Toronto, in an effort to increase density and access to housing, there have been a number of zoning changes that will allow, for example, laneway houses or backyard houses, or much more flexibility in creating multi-family homes from the existing stock. And I think those processes are interesting to look at. I think also in the city of Toronto, we see some very interesting examples of partnerships, public-private partnerships, where government will partner with developers and community organizations like the YWCA of Canada to build housing that is specifically targeted at low income and marginalized populations. Just recently, the Aga Khan Foundation and the Ismaili Council of Canada, and the City of Toronto and the province of Ontario created special seniors homes. We've seen innovative approaches to trying to increase access to housing for Indigenous peoples. So I think more work to collect up some of those examples and share them is quite helpful. And the final thing that I will say is that we also see innovative social financing approaches to try to combat the barriers that are created by traditional financial institutions, and also to pull private sector partners into the mix, because we know one of the biggest barriers, and Canada is now experiencing severe labor shortages, one of the severest barriers to employers getting access to labor, affordable labor, is housing. So we're seeing some interesting partnerships emerge where employers are starting to provide affordable housing so they can attract a workforce, and trying to figure out where people's interests align and how we bring them together to work around common goals, I think is critically important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. This was a very, well-framed presentation. We do have innovations, building techniques, changing zoning, PPTs, right? Increasing densities, but we do need the overall picture, right? So let's move to Ismail Nouri, I don't know if I pronounced correctly. He is the Dean of College of Arts and Sciences, Alia University. I apologize for my mispronunciation in advance overall. Ismail?
Yeah, I'm ready. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, because now 7 p.m. in Bahrain, in Middle East. Or good morning, it's okay. My paper, you can consider look like scream or cry. Environmental pollution, a slow death in Iraq. Actually, the tragedy seen in Iraq. Iraq suffers from the vastness of the desert area. The capital, Baghdad, and most Iraqi cities are suffering from climate change problems resulting from the huge neglect of the reality and environment in the country. Perhaps the most prominent of these problems is the large number of dust storms that began to blow over Iraqi cities frequently. In addition, air pollution rates have increased due to the spread of fuel burning sources, vehicle exhaust, electric power generators, and other industrial activities. There are also many different causes of pollution, such as the former Iraqi weapons factories in the former regime, the sites of the Atomic Energy Agency, and the use of various types of weapons and ammunition during wars. The cases of air pollution and the deterioration of this quality increasing noticeable. At the same time, there have no initiatives to reduce environmental pollution in the air. In the absence of the accurate figures on the rates of this pollution due to the lack of necessary equipment and expertise by concerned authorities in Iraq. An international report on the Iraqi environment was recently issued, prepared by a team of American researchers at the Center of War Studies in New York, USA. The report indicated that dust in Iraq contains 37 metals that have dangerous impact on public health. In addition to 147 different types of bacteria and fungi that help spread disease. The summer season has become a heavy burden on those suffering from respiratory disease due to the frequent blowing of dust storms, the huge use of electric power generators, and the smoke they emit that pollute the air. At the same time, it's pointing to the need for the state to intervene to develop appropriate solutions to reduce those pollutants that kill the life of Iraqi citizens. The director of Division of Communicable Disease in the medical city Baghdad in Iraq reveals the high rates of disease resulting from the environmental pollution in Iraq, pointing out that these diseases reached their highest level during the past decade due to successive wars and the state's lack of interest in human health and environment. In addition to the event that followed in 2003 after the fall of Saddam
I think we are losing you.
sorry.
Now you're back. Now you're back.
Oh, concerning disease resulting from environmental pollution in incidence of carcinogenic disease such as tumors, congenital malformations, paralysis of the limbs, and nerve disorders has recently increased. In addition to respiratory infection and infertility, Mr. Dawood Janabi, responsible in Health Ministry, said that the low of expectancy rates in Iraqi society, and in addition to the high incidence of chronic disease that affect young people. Actually, I squeeze my paper. Let me go to conclusion. Actually, in Iraqi today suffer from the sectarian quota system produce a disaster, administrative corruption, illiterate access to the decision center, militia and parties battling for power, exorbitant salaries, exaggeration salaries. Politicians receive 5 or more monthly salaries. Disaster, neglect, slushness, chaos, ruin, shady deals. The unemployed fill the street, engineers, doctors, different specialists, hopeless case, no hope, failure permits every details of life, only adept at making illusion. It is a cry for Iraq Iraq is falling into the abyss. Thank you so much. I'm sorry because for a tragedy, but this reality. And thank you so much.
Sure, Ismail. Thank you for calling our attention to that, because sometimes in these conferences we keep to the point of promoting the innovation, the design of the products, and so on and so forth. But it's important for us to remember that quality of life, it's the important target that we want to achieve at the end of the day, right? So we want well-located houses, we want quality houses for all. But at the end of the day, if the houses are located in areas that are polluted, right, where crime and violence prevail, etc., we are not improving the quality of life, right? We're not changing our lives.
Sorry, some paradox. Very rich, Iraq is very rich, but corruption killed the country, the state.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And this is a reality, militia, corruption, etc. That we can see in many other countries, right? So yeah, I think it's very critical that also in these spaces we keep this context as the reality that we actually face, right? So we kind of land the discussions that we have. Thank you. So I see Brennan Banks is the founder, vice president, partnerships of Cassandra Banks Foundation from the United States. Brennan.
Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. First, I just want to thank the Urban Economy Forum for once again organizing another round of productive conversations, connecting all of us from various corners of the world to talk about issues affecting our urban economies and communities. Specifically, this group, we're focused on housing and sustainable urban development. And as we have heard from some of our esteemed panelists, we've talked about legal frameworks, we've referenced policies, and more recently talked about some of the environmental considerations connected to urban development. I really want to take another look at another angle, I should say, which is bringing it back to investing into people, which is the foundation for our sustainable urban economies and communities. Really happy that Anna Claudia and Wendy mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion, which was a nice sort of segue for our work and what I want to focus on and share today with the panel and others participating. As I mentioned, the theme today is innovative solutions for housing and sustainable development. But I have something that I don't consider very innovative, to offer today. And I think as Wendy mentioned, it doesn't have to be something new. Quite often we need to just invest in models and approaches that are already out there. Maybe they're just not getting the full attention, support that they need. So my whole pitch, we need to invest more in women of color. We need to invest in women from marginalized communities around the world. We need to invest in women from urban communities, indigenous communities. Invest in women, and you will be investing in more sustainable urban economies and urban development. At the Cassandra Banks Foundation, we specifically invest in getting Black women into pathways for their economic freedom using apprenticeship programs for future electricians in the United States. Here in the US, only 7% of the workforce in the construction industry are women. And I imagine that number is even less in most countries around the world. Many of us know that apprenticeship programs exist around the world. They exist in different models and different forms. Some are formal, registered, multi-year programs with a very structured curriculum. Many are just, the old man around the corner in the community who takes a youth under his wing and shows them how to master a specific trade. Whatever the apprenticeship may look like, women unfortunately are always underrepresented and face more barriers. I think Wendy mentioned some of the barriers as well. Women face more barriers than their male counterparts, especially if they come from urban areas or marginalized or indigenous communities. So with that said, the good news, I think we have two solutions. It's just not, innovative, but these are two solutions that our foundation is focused on to increase the number of female participants in apprenticeships. And the first, again, is a very simple solution. It starts with more awareness and outreach. We have to penetrate urban communities and educate women about the opportunities that come with apprenticeship programs, highlighting the sustainable jobs and pathways to economic freedom that come with these apprenticeship programs. And I say that as the son of an electrician, a Black woman who in the 1970s, as a single mother, walked into her local apprenticeship office and program and took our family from a very modest economic background into the middle class within one generation, and enabled her to build wealth and put me where I am today. We have to dismantle what we call the FBI model. I'm sure some of you have heard of it, but it's fathers, brothers, and in-laws, the FBI model. And this is how most men in the construction workforce learn about apprenticeship programs. So if we don't have the mothers, the sisters, and the aunts in that acronym, then how do we expect to ensure that women are aware of these opportunities? So this FBI approach basically relies on men, passing on that knowledge of these opportunities to their sons, to their nephews, and so forth. And we need to break that up, and that's what the Cassandra Banks Foundation is focused on, here in the U.S. That brings me to the second solution, which are apprenticeship programs, a proven successful step towards apprenticeship program that better prepares women for the working environment that comes with their career in the construction trade or as an electrician, is a pre-apprenticeship program. It's an introduction to the field before they enter into a more formal registered apprenticeship program. And quite often these pre-apprenticeship programs provide them with the unique skills that they might need, further development on before they enter into a registered apprenticeship program, or even consider or apply for a registered apprenticeship program. And there are apprenticeship programs across the U.S., pre-apprenticeship programs, I'm sorry. And I'll highlight one, Winter, which is Women in Non-Traditional Employment Roles, which is based in Los Angeles, California. It's been around for 20 years. It's done some great work, and it has a success rate of over 85% in terms of placing their female pre-apprentice into a total combined 38 construction trades in Southern California. Many of these women came from various hardships in their community, where they were dependent on their community, dependent on government in some cases, but now they've been empowered to take ownership of their economic freedom and are building wealth for their communities, for themselves, for their families. In closing, I would like to note that many of these women in these apprenticeship programs, specifically with Winter, end up working as electricians, where there is a significant shortage of workers to keep up with the green revolution and economy that, is connected to a lot of the things we talk about when we talk about sustainable urban development. As countries around the world continue to invest more in solar technologies, who do you think is installing and maintaining these panels and installations and grids to power our future? These are jobs for the future. And I think, again, there's a strong connection to specific electrical apprenticeship programs and ensuring that we get more women into the trade, diversifying the trade. So again, there should not be anything innovative with investing in women. But as we all know, for every woman we invest in who completes an apprenticeship program, that's a solid investment in sustainable urban development. Again, I thank you for your time and listening today.
Thank you, Brennan. But I would classify as innovative if you look at our history, right? And the amount of investment that has been done into women. But yes, so I don't see more speakers here, Bomi. Do we have more speakers on board, or that's it?
We have, I think he just.
I think that's it, right? The lineup of speakers that we have for today. Yeah. So we should have time for maybe a final round, and I will leave it up to you. But I was thinking about what you said, and two things struck me, and maybe you panelists, you can do like a final reflection, each of you, on that. Is on the how. I think Wendy, Brennan, touched on that. So how are we gonna do things differently in the future? So what are the elements of the process that we have to pay attention? And at the end, what is the expected outcome of our work, right, of this innovation? So what are we aiming to achieve as a society? I know these are big questions. I'm just putting it on the table because I believe sometimes we talk a lot about, you know, the instruments themselves, the products themselves, but pretty much will be changes in how we do things for the future, right? And based on what we are trying to achieve. So if we talk about innovations in housing, so what are we trying to achieve? What do we want to innovate? So maybe a final reflection. I don't know, it was too big for this, but this is a big panel. So let's go. I don't know who would like to go first.
I'm happy to jump in just very. Yeah, no, just to jump in very briefly. It's a great question. And I think, you know, Wendy mentioned it as well. I think when we talk about sustainable urban communities, we cannot overlook the inequalities in our communities. And we have to invest in approaches and models that break down these inequalities and ensure that whether it be inequalities across gender line, inequalities across racial lines, inequalities with, you know, indigenous communities, we need to address those and build a community where we don't leave people behind. And we can, again, talk about, you know, the frameworks and other policies and so forth, which are important and needed. But at the end of the day, if these communities are still struggling with inequalities, and you have a significant percentage of these communities that are living day to day, or, you know, week to week at best, then we're never going to have a truly sustainable community that has a solid foundation to then embrace the legal frameworks, embrace the policies, and embrace other models and approaches needed to bring about more sustainable communities.
Thank you, Brian. I don't know who else would be inspired. Wendy or Ismail? Wendy?
So I work in a business school. So when I approach these issues, I'm always interested in enlightened self-interest. And why I would say to Canadians, at least, we should be interested in this is because of the connection between access to housing and social inclusion, reduction of, you know, social costs, economic growth, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one framing of this that I think is important. And it's part of the reason we're seeing more and more businesses get involved. It's not just because of corporate social responsibility, although that is a clear motivator. It's because they recognize that that investing in equality actually will benefit us all in the longer term. If people have housing, they can get an education, they can get access to training, they can enter the workforce, they're less of a, they're less social costs associated, et cetera, et cetera. And in my mind, when we're looking at public policy writ large, you know, because I do think the points that Ana Claudia raised are also really important. We have to protect our food supply. And increasingly, you know, there's a recognition that local supply chains and access to food and the erosion of the green belt and agricultural land, et cetera, is a real risk. There's increasing recognition that environmental degradation and costs have an impact on all of us. And so to me, one of the lenses that's quite helpful, in addition to thinking about equality and diversity and inclusion, is to look at how we can tie this to economic development and growth on the one hand, and the sustainable development goals on the other hand, because housing is connected to poverty alleviation, to access to education, to health. Like you can interconnect all of the SDGs, I think, and housing is in there somewhere. And to my mind, trying to find a way to break the you know, life and death struggle between neoliberalism and the left to come up with a framework that is easy to understand and explains that access to housing is a right, and by supporting people in gaining that access, we all benefit, is one of the things I think we really need to work on.
Wonderful. Ismail? Ismail, you wanna come with a final? You're on mute. Cannot hear you. I don't know if you're trying to say, yeah.
Sorry, no comment. Thank you.
No comments.
Can I just add one small comment, just building on Brennan's?
You have time here.
You know, one of the most powerful things in my country, and I'm sure it's true in much of the West and probably around the world, is the extent to which gender stereotypes lead to occupational segregation, which leads to wage gaps, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the worst examples of that is entrepreneurship. And I didn't talk a lot about that, but I think investing in women-led businesses is another example of how to drive generational wealth. But one of the worst examples is if you do a search on carpenter on Google image, carpenter, you will get Jesus, you will get carpenter ants, you will get Karen Carpenter, the singer, before you will get a woman carpenter. And the extent to which our stereotypes, and some, you know, they're gendered, they're cultural, etc., are deeply embedded in all layers of our institutions, is really something that we have to tackle as well if we're going to do exactly what Brennan said, which is encourage women to take on new and lucrative occupations where they are currently underrepresented.
At least Karen was a woman, right? Yeah. Anyway, so I think, yeah, we still have a couple of minutes. I don't know if you want to share something, but I think we have some rich messages for the resolution, right, that we have. We have innovations, innovation doesn't mean necessarily doing something, new, but the way we do things, right? Recognizing experiences that are out there, right? And taking these experiences, identify the barriers, right, that we are facing, and taking these experiences into scale. I think looking the combination. I liked the way Wendy framed in her speech. The combination of things that we need to address. The innovations from Canada, right? So we need to innovate in materials. We are doing that. We need to innovate in zoning, recognizing the needs for density. We are doing that, right? We need to work in alliances, through PPPs, look at the financial product. I also, last week in this forum that I was mentioning, I saw many financial products in Latin America focusing on women. Some of them focus on women, heads of households. So having these products, more developed and replicated, I think are crucial. Having the employers looking at, the housing needs of their employees. I felt like going back to Brazil in the 70s, where the big steel companies, they would provide houses and so on. But yeah, maybe they will not build houses, but it's important that they pay attention where my employees live. How do they come to work, right? So we cannot just assume that everybody has an easy access to a house and we just pay the salaries, like taking a neutral position, right? So having the whole constellation of stakeholders to have more awareness about the needs of women and the needs of our workers, and the need to invest in women, and aiming for, overcoming inequality to achieving the SDGs on a parallel note as we achieve economic development and understanding the hard realities that we live. So we cannot just ignore that we are living in hard realities, that our world is violent, our society is violent, and there are things there, like Ismail mentioned, we are living in bad environmental conditions, and we have to improve that. And this is the larger picture, right? It's beyond our areas of business, let's say so, but being aware of that, it's critical, and it's critical that we think our innovations landed and grounded in this context, in these realities. So, yeah, I think we are there by the end of the session. It was a pleasure to be with you here. I hope we keep working as a community of practice to several other spaces and improve our knowledge of experiences and the ways forward.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
With
you
my
very much,
honor.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great